I'm Sabrina, 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my father stood at the head of his mahogany dining table during his lavish Father's Day celebration and called me a loser in front of 50 relatives, business partners, and a journalist from Forbes. He didn't whisper it or pull me aside. He raised his crystal glass and said, "I'm proud of all my children except the failure sitting at this table." People laughed. My brother even applauded, and my stepmother smiled like she'd been waiting decades for that moment. But I didn't cry. Instead, I walked up to him, placed a white envelope on his plate, wished him a happy Father's Day, and left. To understand why, you have to know what life inside the Prescott estate was like. 4 stories of Georgian architecture on 12 manicured acres in Brooklyn, Massachusetts, a place admired in glossy magazines and envied by half of Boston. But to me, it felt like a beautifully landscaped prison. My father, Victor Prescott, loved telling the world he built his real estate empire from nothing, yet much of his early success came from my late mother's family land and connections, details he preferred to forget. Growing up, I knew exactly where I ranked. At the top was Marcus, my older brother and heir apparent, groomed for greatness and praised for every deal he closed. Then Clarissa, my younger half-sister, polished and perfectly curated. And at the bottom was me, the public school teacher who drove a 10-year-old Honda and chose purpose over profit. At weekly family dinners, achievements were measured in revenue and reputation. When I shared that one of my struggling students had earned a full scholarship to Boston University, my father dismissed it as irrelevant to this family, and the table moved on. I spent years believing I simply wasn't good enough, too soft, too impractical, too much like my mother. My mother, Eleanor, died in a car accident when I was 5, and for decades I clung to faint memories of her jasmine perfume and the way she told me I was her greatest gift. The only person who kept her memory alive was my Aunt Ruth in Vermont, who lived in a small farmhouse filled with books and warmth, the opposite of everything the Prescott estate represented. 2 months before that disastrous Father's Day, Ruth handed me a wooden box my mother had left behind, telling me I was finally ready for the truth. Inside were photographs, a journal, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. When I eventually opened it, my world shifted. The letter revealed that Victor Prescott was not my biological father. Before marrying him, my mother had been engaged to a man named James Whitfield, who died in an accident shortly before their wedding. She discovered she was pregnant with me soon after. To avoid scandal and protect family interests, her parents arranged a marriage with Victor, who agreed to adopt me legally in exchange for land rights. He had known from the beginning that I was not his child, and according to my mother, he resented me for it every day of her life. Enclosed with the letter was my adoption certificate. I needed confirmation, so with the help of a trusted friend, I obtained a DNA test using a sample of Victor's hair. The results were unequivocal, 0% probability of paternity. The rejection that had defined my childhood suddenly made sense. I had spent 32 years chasing approval from a man who never intended to give it, because loving me had never been part of his bargain. I met with the retired attorney who drafted the original adoption agreement, and he confirmed everything. Victor signed the papers knowingly before the wedding. Armed with the truth, I didn't plan revenge. I wrote a simple letter stating that I knew he wasn't my biological father, that I released any claim to his estate, and that I was done pretending. I placed the DNA results, adoption certificate, and my letter in a white envelope and waited for the moment when he would once again try to humiliate me publicly. When he called me a loser at his celebration, I realized Helena's earlier scheme to push me into cracking under pressure so I would remove myself quietly had miscalculated one thing. I no longer needed their approval. After I left the estate, Victor opened the envelope in front of everyone. Witnesses later told me the color drained from his face as he read the DNA results and recognized his own signature on the adoption papers. Helena panicked and read parts aloud, inadvertently revealing to 50 guests that I had been adopted and that Victor had known all along. The room erupted. Relatives who had laughed moments earlier began questioning him. Business partners quietly excused themselves, and the carefully crafted image he valued above all else began to fracture. My aunt confronted him about years of cruelty toward a child he agreed to raise, and even Marcus and Clarissa were forced to reckon with how they had treated me under his influence. I wasn't there to witness the chaos. I was driving home feeling something I hadn't felt in years: relief. In the weeks that followed, the public narrative shifted from celebrating Victor's award to scrutinizing his behavior. Business partners withdrew from major projects, and the family facade cracked under the weight of truth. I deleted angry messages from Victor and Helena, but I kept one from Aunt Ruth telling me she was proud. Clarissa eventually came to see me, stripped of designer armor and rehearsed superiority, apologizing for years of competition neither of us truly understood. It wasn't instant forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something honest. A month later, I visited my mother's grave with Ruth and told her I finally understood. I wasn't a failed Prescott. I was Eleanor Manning's daughter, born from love, not transaction. The label of loser had never belonged to me. It had been a projection of a man who saw children as extensions of legacy rather than human beings. Speaking the truth didn't destroy my father, it simply removed the illusion he'd built his identity on. For the first time in my life, my worth wasn't tied to his approval or his fortune or his last name. I went back to teaching, back to my small apartment and my ordinary routines, but everything felt different because I was no longer performing for an audience that had already decided my role. I had walked away not in shame, but in clarity, and sometimes that is the most powerful inheritance you can claim.